Well, you just heard there the voice of the returning officer of the Anambra elections, Professor Florence Obi. And there'll be questions as to whether what she did was declare the polls inconclusive or she just suspended collation as a result of the fact that elections have not been conducted in one local government. Well, elections were conducted in 20 out of the 21 local governments, and 18 political parties participated in the polls. We have about 3 to 4 top runners in the elections. Oftentimes, when people collect the results, they usually have the first 3, APC, PDP, APGA, and oftentimes, sometimes they add YPP, that's a Young Progressives Party, to it. But we have real life, I don't want to say real time, because they're no longer in Anambra, but they're right here with us in the studio. They were in Anambra. They observed the elections. Some of their bodies have already, spoken on what they observed in the elections. We have joining us right now Samson Itodo, who is the Executive Director of Yaga Africa. Welcome to our studios in Abuja.
It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning.
Good morning. And we also have Mr. Victor Giwa, who's a legal practitioner and was also an observer at this election. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Yes, nice to be here.
It's great to have you both back. I'm sure that, I don't know how you felt when you were about to head out to the elections in Anambra State, and I don't know how your family members felt as well. But initially, when we did see a few of our correspondents speak to us, a few of them were wearing bulletproof vests. And I think that was of immediate significance to anyone who was watching the polls to say what exactly was, that was basically the fear of insecurity in Anambra. But it turned out to be a pleasant surprise of some sort, because it would seem that, nothing untoward happened on the day of the election, at least. And we have seen some successful conduct of the elections in most parts. Can you give us your own assessment of it?
Well, Marpe, you're right. This was one of the most difficult elections that, whether as INEC or even as observers, had to deal with. Deployment was, planning for the election was as though we're preparing for war. And you can see that the insecurity that plagued the context created an atmosphere of apprehension and fear, with either sit-at-home orders and then the later withdrawal. All this impacted on that atmosphere. You could see that INEC offices were attacked at different points in time. And so even the commission had to grapple with the challenge of preparations. But on election day, it appeared that all the entities, all the security plans, and all the advocacy and campaign for peaceful election did work, because the entire election, but for cases where you had security breaches and challenges, the election was very peaceful, I must say. But there are 5 key takeaways that we need to draw from these elections. And for Yaga Africa, is that one, that despite INEC's innovation and logistics framework that seem to have addressed some challenges with logistics, that the perennial challenges with poor logistics still remain within our electoral process, and we have to deal with it, because on Saturday you had late arrival of officials. As at 7:30 a.m., polling officials had only arrived in 17% of polling stations based on our PVT data. So we've got logistical issues. The second takeaway is that whilst technology can enhance the integrity of an election, technology can also undermine the integrity of the election and also lead to the disenfranchisement of voters. The BVAS device that was introduced by INEC for this election, fantastic technological innovation, no doubt, and we strongly support that we should sustain the use of this technology for our elections. However, the fact that it malfunctioned in some polling units, they were fixed, in others they weren't. And if you could hear from INEC's press briefing on Saturday, they talked about software hiccups and challenges. I think that INEC needs to audit its own processes so we don't have these issues in our elections.
We'll come to the beavers much later, especially when we focus more on technology and the deployment of technology in the polls, because it certainly has implication for the 2023 elections. And we've seen just the furore that was created over the amendment of the Electoral Act and whether or not there should be something as simple as electronic transmission, and we saw the conversations that went on around it. So we'll come to that shortly, but I'd like to take your own observations, Mr. Giwa. What was of particular significance to you when you went to Anambra?
Well, thank you very much. I think the first thing is the fact that Anambarians were actually in a very, very dicey situations. There was palpable fear. Just from Onitsha, when I got into, I personally got into Anambra State on Friday. My other observers were already on ground. And on Friday from Onitsha, which is known to be a very busy place, everybody was indoor. And I was wondering, and I was asking, the security guys that were with us, that, are these guys not going to come for the election? And they said it was because of not no movement at that time. It was because of the position of the iPod and all of that. And that they have told them, that was the day the declaration of 5 days sit at home was supposed to have started, as declared by iPod. And of course, within that same day, we do that pronouncement. There was really
when
serious
you said Friday,
tension.
was it Friday a day before the election?
That is Friday a day before the election.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I also know that on that Friday, the IJ had declared that there will be no movement, no vehicular movement. In Anambra.
that would be from 11:59 p.m. That's in the night to the next day. So at that point, what was really in the mind of Anambra was the fact that iPod has declared that there will be a 5-day sit at home, in the previously, and that date was supposed to have started. So I tried to interrogate, people I saw, and they were like, "Oh, iPod have said before." Very few of them, had to, come to in terms with the fact that they have withdrawn that declaration and all of that. And there was tension. People did not believe that the process, was going to be peaceful because of the activities of iPod prior to the day of the election, and the fear that they've been able to instill on the voters, even to the point where on the election day, people were still having this, they were just looking through the window, how is it going to be, and all of that. But it was good that the deployment of security guards, security were able to at least douse the tension, and but the environment was tensed, actually. It was palpable fear, and people did not know what they were going to expect at a point, but big on the fact that there were full deployment of security operatives that was able to bring down the tension.
Well, for a number of people, the deployment of security operatives was a double-edged sword, and they weren't sure in which way it was going to swing. But thankfully, it would seem that it eventually swung in the positive direction, and that was to reassure the people that it was safe for them to come out to vote. So on Saturday, I'm sure you also went round as well. What did you see?
Yes, I went round. At least I was actually assigned to Oka North local government. I went then also pulled to Oka South local government. Well, voters' turnout was very poor. Of course, flowing from the threats, like I said, and the people need to, at some time, they need to start getting themselves together and to decide whether or not they were going to cast their votes. Like he said, like Samson said, INEC officials did not get to their various polling units at record time. And there was this issue of what is going on. And at least the voter turnout was very, very poor. The psychology of the voters too also affected them. They also felt that, look, this election, it seems not going to be old. We are not going to risk our lives. It's not worth risking our life, to come out there, line up and vote. But after some time, at least after the observation there are some places where elections started around 12:30, especially in Oka North local government. The electoral officers came to the local government area at 12:45. So you could see that people started picking up the confidence that, okay, maybe this thing is going to work. And so the turn-up started, graduating, started going
well,
up.
Well, it was seen that it went up in most local governments apart from Ihiala, because listening to Professor Florence Obi there, she said that INEC did not deploy in Ihiala as a result of elections were not conducted there as a result of security. So much as it would seem that, there was security coverage for most of the states, there were still, most of the states rather, there were still areas where there were concerns, and it would seem that perhaps maybe the security coverage wasn't enough, or maybe there was, we're not quite sure now, we haven't heard in concrete detail what the security challenge was, but what, to the best of our knowledge, no elections were conducted in Ihiala local government area.
I am surprised when she made that comment. I don't know what she meant by lack of security, because to the best of our knowledge and to the best of what we saw, the numbers of police that were deployed, the number. As a matter of fact, this is the very first election I have monitored where I saw almost all the security agencies. I saw the EFCC, I saw the ICPC, I saw the immigration, I saw custom, I saw the police, I saw the military, and they were just there on the field. And the question was never whether there was no security. You hardly get to a particular point where you don't have security on ground. In terms of security coverage, I would say that it was over 70%. So I really don't understand, like you said, maybe she would need to give us some details of what she meant. Was there a breakdown, or was it that there was absence, total absence of security presence in that local government, which I don't think that would be.
Perhaps there was intelligence.
So I don't really know, but from what the 18 local government we covered and the 2 local government I observed, there was serious deployment of security.
Well, Beavers had great promise in terms of when INEC talked about deploying technology in this polls, and it was supposed to be an upgrade from the, is it accurate, I can't remember the name of the machine.
Smart card reader.
Yeah, the smart card reader. It was supposed to be an upgrade from that. But somehow it would seem that Beavers let, should we say let INEC down? Or was it INEC that let the technology down? We're not quite certain now, but somehow, as Samson did say, it would seem that it had the potential of undermining the elections and disenfranchising voters. Because some people ask, are we really sure that this is, so looking at the total figure so far as collated by pressmen, we're seeing roughly about, maybe about 300,000 people so far who have been able to successfully vote. Would we say that that's all that, I mean, those are all the voters that Anambra could pull out, I mean, at the end of the day?
Well, so the point about the Beavers, and one of the takeaways from this election is we can't surrender our democracy to machines, because machines do have their vulnerabilities. And that's why we have called that INEC audits its processes. Yes, one thing we can confirm, based on the Yaga Africa PVT, was that in 99% of polling stations, the Beavers device was deployed to those polling stations. One. Secondly, that the Beavers contained the register of voters for each polling unit, unlike the smart card reader, where the voter register wasn't installed on the device. Now, the challenge was the fingerprint authentication. And this was similar to the challenge that the smart card readers had. There were also issues with photo verification, because if your fingerprint failed, then the photos. In some cases, the photos weren't displaying, they weren't even capturing the voters, even when their details were on the voters register. But INEC responded, and based on the Yaga Africa's PVT data, we discovered that in about 29% of polling stations where Beavers devices failed, INEC did fix those Beavers devices that malfunctioned. However, in some, and that's about 5 to 9%, the Beavers machines weren't fixed at all. So potentially, the Beavers device did work well in majority of the polling stations. However, the fact that you had challenges in some could potentially undermine the elections. Because I was in a particular polling unit on Saturday where this gentleman, who was a first-time voter, had his PVC, his details were on the device, but it couldn't verify both his fingerprint and his image. And when this was escalated to INEC, they deployed their officials and they fixed it. And that's the point that INEC was making around the software glitches. And from a policy standpoint, and I hope INEC goes back, what occasioned these software glitches? Could the officials who were responsible for performing due diligence on these devices before they were deployed, did they perform their role and their function? or it was a result of mischief? These are questions because INEC has a duty to continually build confidence and inspire confidence on the part of people. But that same device was used to upload the results from the polling units. And the INEC election results viewing portal was a game changer in this particular election and in previous elections where it's been deployed. Because as at Saturday night, members of the public had access to the result. And so it's really transparent. So you could see it. And it just reinforces the fact that the position taken by INEC, by the National Assembly to legalize electronic transmission, we hope that they conclude the process as soon as possible so the president can assent to it, so that that portal can be used, for results transmission and collation. But I'd say that from Yaga Africa's PVT, that the results so far announced by INEC were not manipulated. They were a reflection of the votes cast. If the results fell out of the PVT's margin of error, then we would have taken a position that the results have been altered. So all through the value chain of collation, as far as the Yaga Africa PVT is concerned, we can verify that the results so far declared by the returning officer are a true reflection of the ballot cast on Saturday, and those results have not been manipulated. The challenge is the turnout of voters. And based on the Yaga Africa PVT, the turnout of voters will be between 10% and about 12.5% or 13%, based on the votes cast on November 6th. If the final figure, because the process is inconclusive, if the turnout figure falls out of this margin, it therefore means that somewhere along the value chain, that some alterations or mutilations were made. But for us at Yaga Africa, we can verify to the Nigerian people and the people of Anambra State that the results so far declared by INEC and the returning officer are a reflection of the ballot cast because they fall within the margin of error of the PVT that we deployed for the election.
PVT again means?
It's the parallel vote tabulation, because we deployed 525 observers to random sampled polling units across the state. In fact, in Ihala, none of the sampled polling, elections didn't hold in none of the sampled polling units. And as Saturday evening, we did issue a report that there was no election in Ihala. So it was heartwarming to see that INEC yesterday did declare that elections didn't hold in Ihala for a couple of reasons. And I think, and I agree with Victor, that INEC owes the Nigerian people some level of transparency. We would like to know that where are the polling units where elections didn't hold as a result of the failure to deploy due to security challenges? Where are the polling units where elections didn't hold because there was community resistance? And where are the polling units where elections didn't hold because either INEC officials compromised the process? Because there are reports that in some places, yes, INEC officials actually sold result sheets and they were arrested by the police. These are the information that we need to ensure that, yes, the commission is seen to be taking action to hold its own staff accountable. So at the end of the day, this entire process would not be challenged due to some of these shortcomings.
Well, I'll come to you, Mr. Giwa, but I understand that my colleague has questions for you. So let's hope that he'll be throwing some your way shortly. Chamberlain.
Well, he will be a little patient, but let me go to Samson. Well, when you say that the entire process will not be challenged by some of those shortcomings, but concerning the allegations about vote buying, what do you think that does to this whole process, having enumerated the advantages that this process conferred, of the voting conferred on the entire process?
I think there are two fundamental issues. The first is, at a point on election day where vote buying occurred, what did the security agencies do? Because if, based on our data, that in 99% of polling stations, there were security agents who were present in those polling units, did they reprimand the perpetrators of that act? Because it is against, the Electoral Act. It's an electoral offense. And so what was EFCC, who deployed for the election, or the police doing? Because the point for EFCC deployment for elections is to curb, vote buying. So that's the one question. The second question borders on, political legitimacy. That what you have at the end of the day, is it procured or purchased turnout, or it's a procured or purchased outcome? So it borders on whether the outcome is indeed a reflection of the free will, because when you buy votes, you undermine and compromise the choice of voters. Therefore, you can't say the outcome is a product of free choice. But the fundamental question we need to ask is, how widespread was this? One of the heartwarming developments from Anambra was a particular scenario or situation where voters rejected, the monies that were presented by party agents to buy their votes. I think that's one lesson that we need to amplify and show Nigerians that it is possible to cast your vote based on your preferences and your conscience, and not selling your vote to politicians who, at the end of the day, will not provide the transformative, accountable, and responsive leadership that our society and Nigeria as a whole dearly needs.
On that same issue, Samson, if you don't mind, well, there's another organization, another election observer that said exactly the same thing that you said, that there were pockets of areas where voters rejected the overtures, financial overtures made to them by some of the political parties. But in the areas where there was massive there were massive allegations of vote buying, there is also the allegation that policemen around, security officials around, look the other way. So if it is a crime, I'm wondering what should have happened, because you just said now that there is something that, security officials, they arrested some people who tried to undermine the process by taking some of the materials, sensitive materials away. In that instance, what should have happened if they were as widespread and not just discreet as widely alleged?
I think there's this pervasive culture of vote buying. It's just reinforced by the failure of the state to hold culprits to account. It's not the first time that vote buying is observed in our elections. It's not the first time police officials, I have been in polling stations across different elections where vote buying actually occurs in the presence of police officials. In fact, you'll be shocked that in some cases, the police officials would even be demanding for their own share from the party agents. So it's about accountability. Are we holding people to account? Or we seem to be helpless about this situation because of the poverty rates in the country, as well as the socioeconomic conditions and context for which these elections are conducted. It's about accountability. And the code of conduct, for security agents, as drafted and approved by the Interagency Committee on Election Security, is very clear. You don't expect INEC officials to arrest people who are selling votes. No, it's not the role and duty of INEC officials. It's the duty of the security agencies, because what they are deployed to polling units to do is to curb, all forms of electoral malfeasance. And when it happens right before them and they don't reprimand or take any action, it just raises the question of complicity. But I must say that for the Anambra elections, we must commend the security agencies for their non-partisanship and professionalism. What Anambra tells us, and particularly November 6th tells us, that it is possible in this country to have elections where security agencies can be non-partisan and can be professional. And this was not the case in previous elections. But what we have seen from Anambra November 6th shows that they can be non-partisan and professional.
All right.
We hope that for the rerun of the supplementary elections tomorrow in Iala, they will maintain the same posture as well as subsequent elections.
Okay, we'll return in just a moment and explore some of those other matters that popped up during that election. Don't go away. Welcome back. Well, Victor, having also monitored that election, there are reports about what transpired in Orumba North local government area. The returning officer for that area, the professor of law, who says that he was forced to declare results under duress, and some skirmishes transpired between himself, some officials, and security agencies. What could be the implication of that? First of all, if you give us your impression about what that means.
Well, thank you very much. When, of course, it is simple a legal issue. When a returning officer declares a result and he says, or he admits to the fact that he declared the result under duress, that that result will, on the face of it, not be admitted, because, I mean, you can't declare a result and say the result at your own instance and say that you declared the results under duress. First of all, it tells you that that is not the actual amount of, that is not the normal result. One. Two, it tells you that the result has been compromised. Three, it tells you that there were some other underdealings that surrounds that result. And so that result by INEC should not be accepted as a valid result within that environment. I mean, there's nothing as confessional as saying that when a returning officer says, I declared a result under duress. So that result should not be admitted as a validly accepted result, because, like he said, at his own instance, that he declared that result under duress.
But I mean, as you can see, it doesn't seem like it's a contested issue, because it is part of the results that have already been collated. What does that mean then?
Yes, what it means is that, of course, when the result has been declared, the law is that it's only the tribunal that can annul or set aside a result. But what should ordinarily be done, because the law does not contemplate such scenario where somebody, I mean, you have somebody declaring a result with a gun on his head, and he's declaring a result, and you take the result because the law says once a result is declared, it is only a tribunal that can set it aside. But these are exceptional cases. I mean, if not, you will just see people, I mean, you'll be encouraging such arson when anybody can just come, take a presiding officer to a particular spot, put a knife or a gun on his head, and ask him to declare result, if that result will be admitted. So the law that says that once a result is declared, it is only a tribunal that can set aside that result, does not actually look at such situation where a returning officer will say on his own accord that, look, I declare that result, under duress. So that is the situation right now. But ordinarily, and that is where discretion must come from the INEC official, when somebody declares that, I have declared the result under duress, you should also know that that result shouldn't be accepted. But as it is going to be, they're going to determine. I know that INEC was following the principle that says that once a result is declared, that it's only the court of law that can set it aside. But like I said, that particular position and principle of law does not take into consideration such circumstances where INEC officials or a coalition officer will say that I have declared a result under duress.
Mr. Toda, I wonder if you have something to say to this particular matter, because, I mean, I at some point I remember INEC was also making some pronouncements along the line that, look, if an election is declared under duress, there were some things that they also said they were going to do. As add that to the fact that the National Assembly had also contemplated, I don't know the final position of the National Assembly on giving enough powers for INEC to take any action or not when an election is declared under duress.
Yeah, you see, this again provides a justification why, when the Senate, was alleged to have deleted some provisions in the report, the electoral bill, this Section 68 was one of those provisions that were reviewed before the bill was submitted for third reading. But thanks to Nigerians and the media for amplifying that issue. And what's the proposal? The proposal was to grant INEC the power to review results where they've been declared under controversial circumstances, under duress, or in contravention of the guidelines. And if the National Assembly and the President had concluded, the amendment bill, this situation would have been addressed by virtue of that provision. But as you know, the electoral bill has inchoate status, and so that process is not completed yet. That's why INEC had to rely on the extant law, which is Section 68, that provides that once declarations have been made, you can't, only a court can nullify that. So INEC's hands are tied. That's why the electoral bill, which is currently considered by the National Assembly, will grant INEC the power to review those kinds of results. If you look at what happened in the Imo state, because this is not the first time. In Imo, this happened. One of the senators who is currently in the National Assembly was also alleged to have forced a returning officer to declare him winner at gunpoint. And what INEC had done was to delay issuance of the certificate of return to that particular candidate, but the matter went to court, and the court ruled in favor of the legislator. This is a situation, and I would say that this reinforces the reason why the National Assembly should conclude the electoral amendment bill immediately and transmit same to the president. So it cures this mischief and this fundamental gap within our electoral jurisprudence. I hope that they are watching what's happening in Anambra, and this particular case just simply tells you that the National Assembly needs to address this through the instrumentality of the electoral bill.
Mr. Victor, in addition to that, the returning officer did accuse the police officer of being part of that plot to force him to write that result. He even said there was no election in that area. I was forced to write the result. He equally accused the INEC's electoral officer for that area. He gave a name and said, well, she compromised herself. So, and he's a professor of law, so he knows this has huge implications, naming persons who he accused these certain things. And so one wonders how this may likely stand, because you think that, can you prove this kind of matters, that he was forced to declare results under duress?
Yes, like I said, the truth is that once a result is announced under Section 68 of the Electoral Act, the law is that, and based on reported cases and decided cases, it is only the court that can look. They can either cancel that such result or validate the result. But like I said, that section did not contemplate where a result is declared under duress, and the person who declared such result comes out voluntarily to say, look, I declared this result under duress. Now, look at the implication. In law, that's what we call the mischief rule in interpretation of statutes. And that is why I said that it was wrong for INEC to have, from my own perspective and from the eyes of the law, it was wrong for INEC to have admitted that result. And I will tell you why. One, you must be able to guide against mischief. Now, when the returning officer have said that I declared this result under duress, and also went further to validate his point by saying that certain persons conspired with certain other persons to achieve this particular odious act, INEC should have cancelled that result. And I will tell you why. When INEC cancelled the result, whoever the result favors should go to the court and challenge that cancellation on the ground that he has no power to have cancelled that result. And the reason is because on the face of it, that cannot be a valid result, especially when the person who have declared the result had said that he declared the result under duress. And so the proper thing for INEC to have done is to reject that result and give reason why they reject. And let me tell you the implication. INEC can reject the result and ask for a total cancellation, and that election in that particular polling unit or that particular area should be reconducted because they have such power. Because when somebody announces a result under duress, there's a level of violence. So it can be captured under the fact that, look, and like he said, that there was no election that was conducted there. So I think that the proper thing to have been done was for the INEC officers not to admit such result and allow whoever the result favors to have challenged the result and challenge it under the ground that, well, they would have at that point have cancelled that result. But for you to accept that result is for you to validate illegality that is barefaced.
So that then means that many will be looking to the National Assembly to see how they can address this matter, since the law did not envisage these kind of actions. And then, so what about those who may think, but wait a minute, if the returning officer or INEC rec there doesn't admit that result, isn't the person going to be taking the assuming the responsibility of the court or the tribunal here by unilaterally saying, well, I cannot accept this result? Because if it favors a certain party, the party will challenge their right to do that. And then if it doesn't favor the party, they say, well, yeah, that is the thing to do. So there will be some contestation at that point.
Even at this point, there will still be a contestation. Whatever way you look at it, whoever loses will also contest the fact that that result was one of the results that should be questioned. So whichever way you look at it, that result will be contested. Depends on the circumstances. But look at what we are saying. In applying the law, the law must encourage justice. And justice will not be served when persons who are supposed to uphold the law, like the police officers and the INEC officers, the returning officer have done his own bit to have said, I declared the results under duress. As a matter of fact, the police officers who were there coerced me to declaring the result, and the electoral officers was part of this conspiracy to defraud the voters, because in as much as I am concerned, that is a fraud against the voters. When people did not vote, you came out with a result, forced the returning officer or the coalition officer to declare such result. It is simple, a barefaced fraud. It is fraud on the face of it, and you don't need any other means or way to design that. So what I am saying, and I must be able to state this clearly, at that point, two things could have happened or should happen. INEC should have waited before he admitted that result or cancelled it. And let me tell you, the power to suspend a result or cancel a result when there is breakdown of law and order is still resident on INEC. Although that express provision says before the result is announced. But we can extend it to say that, look, because we must look at the fact that we cannot encourage violence, whether it is barefaced violence or it is tactical violence, because when a police officer comes to you, a police officer that should preserve and process and protect the process makes a returning officer to declare a result. I don't think that should be allowed to go because you've been encouraging that.
Well, Samson, I mean, at this point, it does suggest them that to discourage these kind of matters, the police officer or the INEC electoral officer or whoever is involved in this, the law should prescribe some sort of actions for those kinds of persons. But what would you like to see as perhaps steps or indicators or factors to have been fulfilled before an officer can indeed say, I was forced to declare this under duress, so that we avoid the situation wherein a political party or an interested party can prevail upon a certain official to declare or claim that he or she announced a certain result under duress in order to invalidate the results of perhaps whoever might be getting an upper hand?
I think first, from a policy point of view, we need to incentivize, exposure of this nature. That returning officer needs to be commended, needs to be celebrated for the courage to have come out to state his own side of the story and state what transpired. So we need to encourage, more returning officers and even presiding officers who demonstrate this kind of impeccable character and fraud. The second point is the process of collation needs to be transparent. Because the reason why you have observers, media, and party agents in collation centers is it gives them an opportunity to gather evidence. So when questions of accountability are raised, they can also tender the evidence and the information. The third point is if the police officers who were involved in this act and the electoral officer for that particular local government or all the INEC officials who were involved in this act, if they are not brought to book or brought to justice, then we will be promoting and institutionalizing impunity within our electoral process. So our expectation is INEC will take disciplinary action when thorough investigation is conducted to unravel the facts, but prima facie, it does establish the fact that this particular returning officer was prevailed upon, was forced to declare false results. So those are the steps that need to be taken. But the National Assembly also has a critical role to play. We can't overemphasize the fact that when the National Assembly resumes its plenary on the 9th of November, that the top agenda should be adopting the report of the conference committee, and hopefully that within this week or next week, the bill is transmitted to the president, and the president should assent to it in a timely manner. He's got 30 days. So subsequent elections like Ekiti, like Osun and the 2023 elections will have situations where the bill already addresses all these shortcomings within our electoral process.
Well, I think you have, answered the question I was just about to pose to Mr. Giwa as to, without prejudice to the statement of the gentleman who alleged duress. Some people will say that if that is allowed by INEC in terms of INEC being able to set aside results, that it could have further implications for the other elections. And with politicians always finding avenues to undermine the process, that could be one of the veritable avenues that they could find. You don't see it as a danger?
Well, it is not easy. Unlike what happened in Imo State, where he cited, where the presiding officer or returning officer alleged that he was forced to announce the result. In this case, it was at the point where he announced the result that he said, according to what was said, that he said, look, I announced this result under duress. And he went further to say, look, a police officer, and he mentioned the names of the electoral officer. So what I am saying is that in such case, it becomes very clear. We call it that on the face value of it, prima facie, that you would agree, except there are other contradicting evidence to say that this was what really happened. And that is the reason why you have election observers, you have both international and domestic observers, you have the media and all of that. So in that situation, it is not easy for politicians to just crash into such scenario to say, okay, you know what, we can take advantage of such situation when the result is not going to be favorable to a particular party or candidate. He can go and manipulate one of the. It really would not happen. It is very difficult to have politicians manipulate such scenario than for you to discourage such scenario. So it is better for you to discourage such scenario than for politicians to exploit it to their advantage.
Okay, well, let us see how that eventually happens. Now, we're still looking at voter turnout. Much as the people of Anambra, fondly called in the Anambra, turned out. They've been commended very strongly for their resilience, that despite all that was said about the polls, whether or not it will hold, the deployment of security operatives, they did come out to vote. But there have been questions about declining voter turnout, even before now, even despite the circumstances in Anambra, not just in Anambra, but in most elections. We understand that there were about 2.5 million registered voters. And so far, so good. From the figures that we're seeing, we're not even yet seeing 500,000. Is it something that we should worry about?
Yes, and I was in when I was discussing with some of our observers in the situation room in Oka, there was something I saw, and that's what I refer to as the psychology of voters. So it really came to play during the election on Saturday, and I will tell you, that was the first time of me getting to Oka. And I was just doing a normal interrogation of what happens and what will be the mindset of the voters. And these two things came up. One, the voters will tell you that, I don't know why I should go to vote. And I said, no, you need to go to vote. You need to go out and vote so that you can elect who will lead you in the next 4 years. And the person asked me, those ones we voted, what have they done? And one of the things he said was that, I will take you to the streets in Oka, the capital of Anambra State, and you will see for yourself if there's any reason why you think I should go out and vote. So what is the psychology there? The psychology is that they have not felt governance. Failure of governance by our political party, by our politicians, now made them to feel that whether we vote or we don't vote, if these guys get there, they will not do what they are supposed to do. So we have not felt governance. We need the past years of democracy. So
you think people are getting disenchanted?
Yeah, they're getting disenchanted with governance and with this process. Secondly, of course, one of the reasons that has affected the voters is the threat. And I also considered again, because somebody was asking us, that if you were this person, what would be your reaction? What was the reaction? You go out of Oka, at every street you see potholes, bad roads everywhere. So people cannot really feel governance. People cannot say that they benefited from good governance, not in terms of what you give to me, the 200 naira and all of that. They have no impact. And if you go and look at the ratio of voters turnout and governance, you find out that the rate of which people feel the impact of government is directly proportional to the response at which the ratio at which the voters come out to vote. So one of the ingredients that affected the psychology of the voters is the level of governance of that particular state. But I want to say something about the...
No, just before you say something, let me quickly come to Samson. I know that you've also seen elections in other parts of the world, I mean, Africa especially. What are your thoughts on low voter turnout in Nigeria? I don't know if you've had time to, think about it, and whether it's also a trend you've noticed in other African countries.
Yeah, quite frankly, this is an issue that Yiga Africa has worked on extensively. We've conducted several studies and research on voter turnout, and it's disturbing. First, there are three major reasons why people don't turn up to vote. And the first major reason was a point that Victor makes about the failure of governance, that people cannot link the state of their livelihoods and their participation in the elections. The second was a perception of the fact that their vote doesn't count. Because historically, we've had situations where votes don't count at elections. And even though there have been improvements, we've seen improvements in the quality of elections, that votes do count. That, yeah, previously, people would still be voting and results will be declared. You can't try that now. So somehow we've moved. But the third one was the fact that electoral justice is a scarce commodity within our context. That who decides the final vote isn't the voter who goes out to vote. Is some set of judges who determine the final votes. Look at what happened in Bayelsa. If you look at what happened in Imo. So it has an adverse effect on the psychology of voters, that even when they go to cast their vote, even if the process is transparent, the institution that determines the final vote isn't the voters, but a judiciary that are unelected. So these developments within our polity, yes, there are threats of violence, but I've also seen that in some elections, people prefer deployment of more security. In fact, even in Anambra, there are a cross-section of voters who preferred and love and I admired the fact that there was huge deployment of security, because it provides, they feel safe and they can go out and cast their vote. So these are some of the factors, but it is unacceptable. And Nigeria needs to have a conversation. Our politicians in the National Assembly need to raise this as a question of national emergency, because you can't have a situation where in a state, only 10 to 12% of registered voters are determining who should govern a state of about 5 million persons. There are people in the House of Reps who just came to the House of Reps with only 14,000 votes. There are some in State House of Assemblies who just got the seat by either as low as 9,000 votes. This is a country where we take pride that we have a population of over 200 million, a voting population of close to 110 million. Political legitimacy conversations need to be held. The more people refrain from voting, the more question on political legitimacy, whether the people who are leading do have the legitimacy to hold that particular office if they are only elected by a few people. But for those who don't come out to vote, they also need to know that when you don't vote, someone else is voting for you. Because this small fraction of people have decided who will determine whether you eat tomorrow, what air you breathe, and whether you're able to move from one point to another.
I was actually hoping we could, extend it to, comparison with other African countries, but we're totally out of time, gentlemen. I know that the conversations on Anambra will continue for a while because there are many lessons to be learned. Prosecution of offenders for those for where vote buying was noticed, and allegations of security men looking the other way abound, and there'll be questions as to the capacity of INEC to deal with electoral offenders. So I know that there'll be much more to discuss, but I have to thank you very much this morning for coming on Sunrise
Thank you, always a delight.
Samson Itodo is Executive Director of Yaga Africa, and Mr. Victor Giwa is a legal practitioner who was also an observer at the elections in Anambra State. Gentlemen, thank you once again.
Thank you so much.
We'll take a break at this point. When we come back, we'll certainly have another perspective, hopefully this time all the way from Oka. Please stay with us.